Greetings, and today I have a rather different Gwent video for you guys. So for today's video, I wanted to sort of take a look at all of the scenario cards that came out with the Merchants of Ophir expansion. I'm just sort of reviewing them, stuff like that. Like, I don't want to rank them best to worst because like a lot of factors definitely do come in when it comes to that, like how often they're played, their synergy with their factions, and how well it works with the mechanics that come with each faction, which is similar to what I'm doing. So you guys can pretty much interpret like which ones I would probably find more favorable over others. And honestly, like, I think you guys can make like sort of your own list yourselves. If you guys do have a list like that though, definitely do let me know. Or if you guys want me to make a ranking video, like ranking, you know, the scenarios best to worst, you know, that'd be pretty cool. That'd be a suggestion as well. But for now, I'm just sort of going over them and just sort of reviewing them in a sense. So since I'm already here, I'll just start off with the Monsters artifact. Now, of course, the introduction of these artifacts did invite a lot of artifact removals in the deck. So we saw a lot of Bomb Heavers in the decks, a couple of Dancing Stars. We've seen a lot of Falsiri implemented into Nilfgaardian decks, of course. And it's quite funny because Nilfgaard seems to have that very reliable artifact destroyer, like as a faction class card. And they already have a pretty strong artifact in themselves. So anyway, we're gonna start off with the Monsters artifact is Haunt. So Haunt works very well with Death Wish, but very indirectly too, that this artifact can actually work well with a couple of other of the other mechanics from Monsters, of course. This one has the ability to consume units as well, which again, Consume and Death Wish obviously go together because Death Wish's abilities trigger when they do get destroyed. It can also work with units if you're working with Thrive units as well, because if on deploy, if you do consume, it does boost Thrive units if it is over their power, so it does work with that as well. You do have a Dominance component, although Dominance is not as powerful because you have to be able to make sure that you have the highest unit on your side of the field, and your opponent is obviously going to want to try and whittle that down with maybe a couple of removal cards. We also got introduced to 5 power special cards for a couple of the factions as well. We're talking I believe Nature's Rebuke for Scoia'tael and Boiling Oil from Northern Realms, just to name a couple of examples. So the opportunity for being able to whittle down monsters to tall units have definitely shown up as well. And of course, status from Nilfgaard, which can just outright destroy any unit on the field. But other than that, you do start off with a Death Wish engine. So every time you play Death Wish, this card does get stronger. You do not want to get greedy with this, of course, because Reset's a thing, again, status is a thing, Morkvarg's a thing, so you want to be careful with overpowering your Desert Banshee, but it is an engine, so it is not bad to have. Barghest and Night Wraith are good with that deploy and Death Wish, so Haunt is mainly meant for Death Wish, but again, you can combine it with some of its other, some of the monsters' other mechanics, like I said, Thrives, Consumes, Dominance if you plan on trying out Dominance. So it's not like Haunt is specifically meant for Death Wish, but like you can, if you're creative enough, you can find ways to implement this into like other decks as well. But it is obviously meant for mostly Death Wish. This deck is pretty strong. 14 provisions isn't so bad just because of again how well monsters work well with each other. Like you can pretty much combine, like if you're trying to make a Thrive based deck, you can put a couple of Consumes and Death Wishes because it does make your monsters stronger and their abilities do activate. So that is pretty strong. So at 14 provisions, it is a fair number to put it in. Next, we go straight to the Nilfgaard's faction. Nilfgaard's scenario artifact is Masquerade Ball. This one works mostly with status Nilfgaard. Soldier Nilfgaard, not at all. Radia Nilfgaard, potentially. That's the thing. Radia is such a very versatile kind of deck or core card to make a deck around that you can pretty much implement artifacts into it. So I'm not going to count Radia / Shoop decks. So I'm just talking more of the common ones. Assimilate will work as well because these cards do not come from the deck. You kind of have to make a hybrid of Assimilate plus status, so you're sort of seeing a little bit of mid-range there, so that can work, but this is mostly meant for for status Nilfgaard. And status Nilfgaard is super powerful. You are able to get rid of a lot of your opponent's key cards from the field relatively easily. You combine this with a tactical decision or possibly a strategic withdrawal, and you're able to destroy a card. Although strategic withdrawal is mostly meant for Vincent, which again is a pretty strong choice. As long as you have 2 units with statuses, Vincent destroys them both, so you do get a lot of power in that sense. The only thing that I've noticed is that status Nilfgaard cannot keep up with the swarms of elves and monsters, so it does not do as well against swarm decks, especially if they choose to spread the boosts as opposed to boosting 1 unit, which is pretty common for tall units with monsters and stuff like that. So, but other than that, this is a very powerful card that works with status Nilfgaard super well. It is often combined with the Caretaker. So you're able to play Masquerade Ball on 2 separate rounds, which is again pretty powerful because Nilfgaard now has a lot of cards that let you poison, and they've introduced cards like Morale and King Cobra with the new expansion that are neutral cards, so you can definitely work with that. So this is a pretty scary card to see on the field, honestly. Even if I'm playing with a swarm deck, it is pretty scary to see regardless. And at 14 provision, I think that's also fair. So this is a pretty strong artifact card in itself. Not to mention it works with the strategy. Oh, speaking of, I forgot to mention the stratagem. With monsters, it works pretty well too, I believe, because the monster stratagem... Actually, no, not quite. Not quite. It doesn't quite work with the stratagem. Simply because it just triggers. You don't actually destroy anything or create a new one. So it doesn't boost the Desert Banshee. But you can still sort of consume it, I guess. But like, yeah, it's not as... working as well as the collar with the Masquerade Ball, because with the summoning of that Thirsty Dame and you activate the collar, that is an extra boost for the Thirsty Dame. Not so much for the poison, because you don't really want to put extra statuses on 1 card, because that just makes a Purify much more powerful. So Masquerade Ball is pretty decent. So we'll move on. We have the Northern Realms. We have Siege. This, I believe, is the first one where I can only see this working with a Siege Engine deck, because that is what it is based around. But Northern Realms seems to have classified it's starting to sort of identify itself with Siege Engines, Warfare cards. I hope to see a bit more Warfare support in future expansions, of course. But it does have other decks that can work pretty well with. We have seen a couple of shield support cards, although again against status Nilfgaard, they're absolute garbage. They're not gonna work well against it. But a lot of the other decks you can make is you have your reliable charge orders, which is still pretty powerful actually, especially if it goes uncontested. The Blue Straps Commando is an archetype that has not been seen in a while. But you know, it's still pretty powerful as well. You combine it with Draug. Obviously will not work with with Siege. So Siege is mostly meant for Siege Engine. As in accordance with its stratagem, it can work if you play the Reinforced Trebuchet to trigger its Inspired ability, which means that if your opponent does decide to damage it, it won't be able to get rid of the Inspired effect in 1 turn, simply because you have that shield, so it still has its Inspired going as long as you have its damage, or as long as it's not damage to its base power. The thing I always liked about Northern Realms is that a lot of it's like, when I say mid provision cards, like we're talking 6 to 9, that was not on purpose. They're actually really good in options, like as opposed to monsters. A lot of the monster strong decks, like if it wasn't for Penitent and the Beast coming in, the mid-level for monsters in terms of provision cards will not be good. Like you'd be wanting adding your old Spear Tips, your old Spear Tip Asleep, you know, stuff like that, which are all at the 9 to 12 cost, which is pretty high. And not to mention they already have a hero power that has only bringing 11 provisions. So that's one thing I always liked about Northern Realms is the good way to versify this deck for its versatility is through its mid-range cards, which are pretty powerful. Like we're talking Scoia'tael, which can take out a Warfare card, so you can play that extra bombardment with Siege as long as you have all your Siege Engines intact. We're talking other cards. Let's see. Now you probably wouldn't be able to work with Priscilla because it's not order. Well, the only Siege Engine I've seen that has order is that Ballista. Sorry, the Reinforced Ballista. But it's only 1, so it's not so powerful. Foltest Pride is not really something that a lot of people tend to play, because it does make sense. You're really gonna only be able to use this thing once anyway. Either it's gonna get destroyed before you manage to get any extra charges on it. Although it's not, again, not so ideal to play a card with charge because siege engines only have so many cards that have charge in their order. So, but nonetheless, Siege Engine Northern Realms is pretty powerful. Combine it with Pincer Maneuver or even Mobilization, you get that extra reinforced trebuchet, or you can trigger that Chapter 1 in one turn. So that's actually pretty strong. You'll find that some of the hero powers allow you to trigger artifacts Chapter 1 before it gets destroyed by artifact removal. So that's pretty good in itself. You can always go with that. Your deck might be strong enough that you won't need to activate Chapter 1, but you know, that only puts your siege provision value at 4, and that's not a good thing. You don't want to put yourself in that situation. And again, at 14 provision, just because of how powerful Siege Engine Northern Realms is, it's a pretty decent, it's a good provision to put it in. Next, we got the Scoia'tael with Feign Death. Now, this is very elf reliant. You can play this in a couple of Harmony decks, but it's mostly meant to be played with Swarm Elves. So Feign Death, I can see this definitely working with Vernassil, but again, you want to use... Elves is mostly used for Swarm nowadays. Vernassil is good for control if you use it in its melee ability, but let's be honest, we're gonna put Vernassil in the range row to create more units because we have cards that are very Swarm reliant. Yavin, Isengrim, Great Oak. Am I missing? I think I'm missing one more. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. I can't think of it on the top of my head. But Feign Death is a very powerful card. At 12 provisions, though, that might be a little bit cheap because it doesn't have to be sort of the central card in your deck, because to be honest, the Great Oak really is the central card in most decks, and now Vernassil has now come in too with the Swarm Elves. So that's why, like, you see a Swarm Elves that do run Feign Death and some that don't. And it's crazy how powerful the Elves can still be without having Feign Death in their deck. So at 12 provisions, I don't know. I think that's a little bit too low. Like 13 might have been okay, but 12, I don't know. That would be a little bit too cheap. And in terms of its stratagem, which works pretty much only for Elves, like, let's be honest, it's mainly meant for Elves. You'll see some Harmony to work with it, of course, but because last month we see Dwarf Scoia'tael was the most powerful faction, most powerful deck. Now it's Elves, so they completely just shifted the table, or shifted the balance from the Dwarves to Elves for Scoia'tael, which is actually pretty insane. So, with Harmony, you also got Barnabas Beckenbauer, which can, you know, get some good boosts as long as you have Harmony going pretty well. But Feign Death, mostly Elves, some Harmony. Obviously, no Dwarves. This thing will not work well with Dwarves at all. So yeah. Next is Skellige's artifact, and quite personally, this is my favorite artifact because it gives you sort of the most powerful one-turn ability ever. You combine it with Second Wind, bring back Ermion, Freya's Blessing, get another Druid in. You get all three conditions done before it even gets destroyed by artifact. That's kind of why I like Skellige's artifact the best. This mostly works well with Crow Druid, another Swarm deck, of course, so it can defeat status Nilfgaard because of your ability to supply a whole field with a bunch of beasts, a bunch of druids. Not to mention, Gremist is a super powerful purifier, so you can purify pretty much any and every poison as long as you have the alchemy cards available for it. Which will kind of mean that they'll be targeting Gremist, but they're also taking their eyes away from a couple of like stronger units like Armored Drakkar, Spellbound Cultist. Like, you can't really get your hands on them with poison if Gremist is just purifying them every turn because you're playing alchemy cards. So this is a really powerful artifact. In terms of its stratagem, no synergy whatsoever. I mean, there can be synergy, but let's be honest, nobody plays Mask of Uroboros when you're playing Clan Druid Skellige. Mostly, you could play TA. You could also play the Jin Lamp. But it's very rare that you see someone playing the Mask of Uroboros, just because it really doesn't have... It does well with deck thin, and if you plan on playing Discard Skellige, which is, I think, a dead archetype now. Well, maybe they'll bring it back and maybe in future expansions, but as for now, Discard, not so popular. So right now what's really taking over is you still got some self-damage going in, but really it's the Crow Druid that's making the appearances in the net ladder. So Gedyneith is pretty good for that at 13 provisions. I think with how powerful Swarm Crow really is, it's a good provision stay. And when I say really powerful, like I'm talking, there's one card that really sticks out in my mind, and that's the Crow Clan Druid. This thing is an 8 for 5, and it's pretty much guaranteed because you have a lot of cards that can summon crows. Your artifact summons crows. Crow Mother summons crows. Crow Messenger summons crows. Raging Bear is even good there, especially because that's going to be your turn 1 play, unless you have an Armored Drakar, in which case you probably play Armored Drakar first into the Raging Bear. But Crow Clan Druid, you almost get its 8 value, like the moment you play. Like this is a guaranteed 8 value for 1 turn, so it's very powerful. You got a couple of removal options for Giga Scorpion, the Decoction, and the Delirium. The only weakness is probably overfilling your deck with crows, because I found myself in situations where I've filled my deck and I don't have any more cards. Like I have still like 3 more units to play, and I can't play them because A, my opponent does not destroy, and B, they're just letting me sort of fill up my field and, like, you know, letting everything do their thing, and like I'm kind of screwed. I can't play any units, so I'm kind of capped at that power, which kind of sucks. Which kind of led me to the idea of playing one deck with the Bone Talisman, so in case I do end up overfilling, Bone Talisman is sort of there to bail me out. But yeah, as long as you pretty much spread out your rounds, this is not a card that you definitely want to invest a lot in 2 rounds as opposed to just 1, because of its ability to fill the board out relatively quickly. So, but it's a really powerful artifact. I like it. And the last one, and I think the most unpopular of them all, is the Passiflora. Now, on paper, this scenario is actually good on paper, because all of Syndicate is just about paying money and making abilities happen with that money. The Passiflora is just a massive money maker. The Passiflora Peaches is a money hoarder with a boost, so that's not so bad. Eavesdrop and Swindle are both very powerful cards. I think what kind of like ticks me off about this, well, not ticks me off because I'm not really mad about it, but Eavesdrop comes after Swindle. Okay, so that you can just kind of tell I haven't really played this ability, this artifact that much, because I keep thinking that Swindle comes after Eavesdrop because of the way it's ordered, and I'm like, why does Swindle come after Eavesdrop? Anyway, so yeah, it is pretty strong money making, but again, because it mostly works, well, I wouldn't say it mostly works with Horde, but it's like if your prologue is summoning a Horde, then you kind of have to start thinking about, like, shoot, should I spend money on, let's say playing Philippa, or playing Savola, or playing, what's that card called? I already forgot because well, Morios, that's the card, Morios. Maybe playing Dire Mutated Hound isn't so bad. Azure Javed you definitely want because of their very powerful defender still. But like if your prologue is a Horde reliant unit and you're progressing whenever you play a unit with Fee, which means that they're pretty much gaining value the more coin they spend, then you have to really work on that balance. Now, of course, your chapters 1 and 2 cards does generate a lot of coinage, like a lot of coin. So having a 12 provision is actually really good. If it was just a tad bit cheaper, which I know might be going a bit too much, but if it was just a tad bit cheaper, I would actually use this in a deck. But it's just a bit tough, just because like you have cards with Tribute, Horde, Fee. Tribute and Fee rely you to pay on your coins. Horde relies you to keep on your coins. So if you're playing, let's say, like a somewhat dedicated Horde deck, this deck would be good. But again, you're overflowing yourself with 9 coin, in which case, if you don't want to spend them, or you want to spend them carefully. But the problem is with a lot of removal now in most decks, before you even get the chance to pay for your ability, your card's already dead. So it's a bit tough. And I can see that's why pretty much Passiflora is on the bottom of the people's list when it comes to like artifacts. But honestly, on paper, it looks good. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Of course, some of you guys might disagree. That's just sort of my opinion. Honestly, like most of you guys might disagree with some of the things I've said, just because like this, it's just my opinion because we all have differences in opinions. I just sort of want to let you guys know what sort of my thoughts are on these artifacts. Of course, they all get this right about artifact removal, so don't even bring that part up because, like, that's kind of like a duh thing. So just don't bother with bringing that up. But in all honesty, those scenarios, like, they were a good addition with the expansion, pretty strong. They definitely offered a bit of flexibility when it comes to building your decks. So like your typical Death Wish deck Like, you know, you wanted to add the artifact in it to make it stronger, of course, because, you know, getting all of those values are pretty nice. But at the end of the day, if they get hit with artifact destroyers, then they get hit with artifact destroyers, and you just kind of have to play on from there. So that was sort of my review / thoughts on the artifacts that came with Emergence of Ophir expansion. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the comment section below. Leave a like, of course, if you guys enjoyed this video, and subscribe for more content. And other than that, this is Endo signing out. I'll catch you guys in the next one.